All right, Marathon 111. I'm sorry I've been kind of absent with these story videos. I've been working on another project, and I've kind of hinted at what it is. And I hope that next week, maybe in the next video, I can totally announce it and launch this new project so that you guys know what it is. You can go over and take a look at it, and we can all enjoy it together, because I'm guaranteeing you one thing. Nobody's having more fun with this than me. You think you're having fun with it? I got you beat by 100. I got you beat by 1,000. I'm having way more fun with this than you guys can even think. So I hope I'm able to announce it, but right now we got Marathon 111. I've got 4 really awesome Bigfoot stories in here. 2 of them are exceptionally well. One of them kind of cracked me up, and it's not a funny story, but it got me tickled. I'm going to put it at the end. It's really good. And I hope you guys enjoy this. So hold on to your weaves. This thing's going to be a fun ride. All right, here we go. This is an email I got recently that I thought was very interesting. The writer's name is Terry, and she says, I'm now 63 and I live in central British Columbia, Canada. When I was 15, I lived in Toronto, Ontario. I attended the Canadian National Exhibition. They had an exhibit of what I later learned was the Minnesota Iceman. It was frozen in a freezer. The face and partial front was exposed. Signs were everywhere for me not to touch. Do not touch was everywhere. I was a rebellious teen, and I ignored the signs and touched it anyway. Immediately, the hair went up on the back of my neck. It felt like semi-frozen meat, like a roast. I knew it was not latex or rubber. This started my interest in Bigfoot. And after much reading, I had a good knowledge of the subject. That was all back in the mid-1970s. In the year 2000, I was a prospector, and my interest at the time was searching for the lost Lemon Mine. I met an aging prospector from Crow's Nest Pass who had a sample of ore with silver in it. He directed me to a valley on the border of Alberta and British Columbia. And with my father-in-law, we made the trip into the valley. We made camp the first night and continued the next day into a bowl, high up into the crest of the Rockies. I climbed further with the sample in my hand while my father-in-law waited in the bowl below. Upon reaching near the crest of the mountains, there was a huge cave. The opening was 12 foot by 30 foot wide at least. This place took my breath away. I was in awe at the size of the cave and the colors. Everything was green inside and all in different shades. My attention was drawn to several horizontal tunnels into the rock. That in itself is not strange, but on closer inspection, each hole had been lined with dried animal hides. The hides appeared to be deer and were curled like when you throw a hide in your yard and it dries. For years I pondered the thought of why the hides were there. These hides would have to be replaced from time to time. Rodents or insects would eat the hides, especially through the winter months. In later years, I came to the conclusion that this was indeed a Bigfoot cave. What else would have that kind of intelligence? I planned to return, but I never did. This cave is not easy to access, and I believe the Bigfoot would know of your approach long before you arrive, and your window of escape would be non-existent. I once heard a Bigfoot researcher person say only one sighting or footprint has to be real for their existence to be real. Thank you for your time, signed Terry. Terry, that's an awesome email. Caves give me the willies. I don't know. I guess if it had a big opening and it was kind of shallow, I would go in. But I've been to Mammoth Caves in Kentucky, and I've been to Blanchard Spring Caverns in Arkansas, and probably some others. But I know this: whenever I go in there, I get the willies because, man, I don't know. It's a little claustrophobic for me. And I'm not really that claustrophobic, but it just gives me an uncomfortable feeling. But I think if I saw one with that big of an opening and it wasn't too deep, I'd probably walk in and take a look. And then you see all these animal hides curled up, lining the inside of these holes. That's fascinating stuff. And you probably know humans don't go up there very much. This was a great little piece of evidence, and I really appreciate you sending it. It was interesting. Thank you. Here's an email from Bobby, and here's what he says. I live in North Carolina in Anson County. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in an adjacent county. I've lived here for 35 years on my land that my grandfather left me from his estate. It has a pond and many acres of woods on it. My tract is in the middle of 7 tracts that are owned by other family members, and they're primarily wooded areas. I'm now 56 years old, so nothing has ever surprised me, well, until now. I've always let my chickens range out during the day to forage. In the evening before sunset, they would always return to their pen, and I would shut them up at night so the coyotes wouldn't get them. Well, they stopped going back into their pen in September of 2019. I could catch them and put them up, but they would fly back out so they could sit on the ground right beside the dog kennel with 2 of my dogs about 50 feet from their house. This was odd to me because I thought they would be safer from the coyotes in their pen, but I got tired of catching them for nothing, so I just left them out. I had also noticed that the coyotes had ceased calling out at night, or even maybe they had left the area. They were a permanent fixture here for years. And with the coyotes gone, I figured the chickens would be safe staying outside overnight after all. I did keep a dog beside the chicken pen so he could guard the chickens and keep the wildlife away. This pen was 100 feet from our house and surrounded by trees. My dog there was constantly running back and forth at night and barking nonstop. We thought it was deer since there are so many around here, so we weren't concerned about his barking. About the same time that the chickens started their routine, my wife and I started smelling decomposition and wet dog. We have a lot of deer and we live close to the road, so we attributed the decomposition smell to deer that had been hit by vehicles and died in the woods near our house. But we never ever saw a deer carcass. The smell would come and go over time. Now, this continued until July of 2020, when I had the experience of hearing thumping on a tree in the woods behind our greenhouse while I was cutting wood one day. It was a pattern of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 in that sequence. Then there was a pause, and the pattern would start again. I felt like I was being watched, too. I would listen to the knocks for a while, and then I decided to answer it myself on the red tip beside the dog kennel. After doing 3 sets of these thumps, the sounds from the woods stopped. I went back to cutting wood. On Sunday, September the 27th, 2020, I went out to feed the dogs and cats, and I found my dog in the hog pen dead. I found him exactly where he had slept in the pen, with his neck broken and his head twisted around looking backwards. His eyes were open, with his right front leg dislocated, pointing back over his shoulder. I went back inside our house, and I told my wife what I had found. My wife is a forensic anthropologist with crime scene investigation training, so she was intrigued. She found the entry point over the barbed wire that was ripped down and impressions inside the pen on solid ground. She even found a footprint just outside the pen that we took several cell phone pictures of. After our investigation, we buried my dog and we had a somber day of disbelief. The next morning, I went out to our greenhouse to put a water jug in. Again, I had the feeling that I was being watched. When I exited the greenhouse, my chickens came running, hoping that I would give them some cracked corn like I usually did. About halfway to the corn bin, I heard a grunt behind the greenhouse, and then I smelled that terrible odor, and I froze in my tracks. The chickens also froze and stretched their necks high, looking in the direction of that sound. They didn't move until I did. I went ahead and fed them the corn, and I walked back to the house and sat down in the swing on our patio. This was unnerving because I know what deer and wild hogs sound like when they grunt, and this was neither. That afternoon, I decided to put some lights in the backyard near the hog pen because we had no security lights out there. While installing the lights, I sensed again that I was being watched, and that odor was back. I install the lights, and the other dogs have stopped barking towards the woods at night, and everything seems to have calmed down. Back in the 1970s, I used to hear horrible screams back in the woods where I hunted. It always happened when someone was with me. I don't know the significance of that, but at least there were witnesses. It happened frequently enough that we stopped hunting that area. Now we hunt closer to the road. And from the 70s until now, there's been nothing out of the ordinary going on here. And this recent activity with my chickens and my dog being killed has changed me in a way that I don't understand. I've never been afraid of being out in the woods, but I'm a bit jumpy now. I never work outside without a gun. I haven't told anyone the latest things that have happened. I'm waiting to see if anyone else has had a similar experience. Thanks for your channel and hopefully understanding that I'm not crazy. Bobby, you're not crazy. You're not crazy at all. I hear this stuff all the time. I've never experienced it, but apparently people have these type of experiences all the time. And I think I've only got 1 or 2 stories up where Bigfoot was suspected in killing a dog. That's the part about this story that breaks my heart, because I love dogs, and I hate the fact that your dog was killed in such a violent way. Maybe he never felt it. It sounds like it was pretty quick. So, but I'm sorry about the loss of your dog, and it sounds like you got Bigfoot activity there. I don't know if there's anybody in your area you can call or know that might be able to help you, and I don't know if they could even help you if they knew about it. But this experience is not uncommon. I mean, people that have Bigfoot on their property, I think these kind of things happen a lot. I really appreciate you sharing this with us, Bobby. You did a good job writing it, and it's very clear. We can all see what's going on. Thanks, buddy. Here's an email from Leo. This is really a good one, and it's pretty scary, and it's action-packed. I think you're going to like it. He writes, in late October of 2004, I had an encounter that would forever be burned into my mind. Late fall is when the coastal region of Oregon produces a prized mushroom called the matsutake. They bring big money, and they're difficult to pick because they have to be unearthed in the same way truffles are gathered. Our group consisted of 3 people, a good friend of mine and his cousin and myself. We decided to head out and fill our buckets. The place we chose was Storm Ranch in Coos County, Oregon, more specifically Langlois. Storm Ranch is federally protected, but we went ahead with the plans and we hoped for the best. At 10 p.m., we all walked in the back way, trying to avoid detection. It wasn't long after that I became uneasy. Something didn't seem right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I chalked it up to paranoia because I knew if a game warden caught us, we would be cited at the very least. We were in brushy terrain and in sandy soil. The moon is basically all the light that we had, with the exception of the lights on our cell phones. 30 minutes into this mushroom hunt, I heard some free-range cows panicking at my 7 o'clock. They would run 50 feet, turn around, and run back to where they started. But they did it in such a manner that I knew something was wrong. It had to be a predator, probably a bear, so my head was on a swivel. We stayed put for a few minutes, and then we decided the coast was clear, and we crawled on in search of more mushrooms. I moved clockwise around a patch of huckleberries, and I heard the cows running frantically again. I had crawled a good distance, but the cows were still at my 7 o'clock. I couldn't hear my buddy at this point, and it was then that I realized I had moved between the cows and the predator. My friend's cousin was a kid and was still with me. We stood, and we were still in brush over our heads. With a predator in the area, it was time to get this kid out of there. It was dark and we had not traveled trails to get to this point. There was no clear path back, but we started moving in the general direction of the highway. We both fought through the thick brush, desperately trying to get to clear ground and pick up the pace. The cows kept running back and forth. I couldn't see them, but they were close because I could hear them clearly. A recurring thought was that if this predator wanted to take a cow, it could have done it by now. We had been there for over an hour. We finally popped out on a dirt road, and for a second I felt safe, but it didn't last long. I sat down on the edge of the road to rest a while we waited for my buddy who was still out in the brush. When he figured out that he was alone, he would have to come this way to get home, so all we had to do was wait. I pulled an apple from my pack and I took a big bite. The kid was standing in the gravel road in front of me. He was really nervous. And then the cows started raising hell again. I stood up and I watched the road. A bull elk came out of the brush and onto the road and then promptly started sprinting up the gravel shoulder. Everything in me said get up and run. Everything. My mind couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. Right behind the elk, a huge figure appeared sliding in the gravel in the road. Its feet actually came out from under it like it was sliding into second base. I dropped that apple and I grabbed my phone and I hit the light app, pointing it in that direction. And there it was, 75 feet away, pushing itself up off the gravel. When it was standing straight up, it took up half the road. I'm guessing it was 7 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet wide. I wouldn't know the weight, but let's say it probably weighed about 500 pounds. It just stood there heaving like it was angry, looking down the road where the elk had run. It was looking away from us, but then it turned to look right at us. I don't know why this hit me, but I noticed its legs were short in relation to its body. And I thought to myself, how can something with legs that short run so fast? The arms hung almost to its knees, and it stood there heaving, looking at us like it wanted to murder us. But instead of coming at us, it turned 90 degrees, it took 2 hops, it cleared a 2-lane road and jumped over the 4-foot-tall brush on the shoulder. We never heard a twig break. It just cleared the whole thing and was gone. I was ready to run, and I almost did, but my buddy was in there, and I had to wait on him. It was quiet for a minute, and this kid and I stood in the middle of that road as silent as a mouse. Actually, neither one of us could speak. And then we heard something big coming again. It was more than one. They were coming to get us. The only thing I could do was hide. So I found a cut in the bank and I threw the kid in there. I crawled in beside him and I pulled my legs up to my chest. And then I told the kid to get as small as possible. We sat there motionless for 2 hours in the most uncomfortable position you can imagine. But that was better than being killed by a Bigfoot. While we sat there, we could hear them all around us, moving, breaking sticks as they walked. And we heard voices, but they weren't human. It was intelligent, though. I don't know any better way to describe it other than to say that it sounded like raccoon chatter mixed with rain falling on leaves. That probably makes no sense, but that's the best I can do. 2 heavy feet were running down the road right at us. So I pulled my legs in closer to my chest and I tucked my head down and I got ready for the attack. But it was an attack that would never come. It was my buddy. He didn't see us tucked into the bank, so when we stood up, we scared him to death. He finally realized that it was us and he said, "I'm glad it's you. Something's been following me since we got separated." I could see the pain and the fear in his face. And then we headed for the highway and then home. He and I were friends for another year or so, and then he got a job in Oklahoma. He moved there, and I haven't talked to him since. This happened 16 years ago. I still hunt mushrooms, and I've gotten that feeling that I was not alone while out in those remote places. And when I get that feeling, I leave. Oh, Leo, what an awesome story, man. Woo! Oh my gosh, I love these stories. I know they scare the people that it happened to, but they're such exciting stories. And there's really nothing I can add to that. You guys got the whole enchilada in that one story, and I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Thanks, Leo. I appreciate you, buddy. My name is Andrew, and you can use my name for this encounter. This is quite a lengthy story, and I apologize in advance. This happened in August of this year, so it's still quite vivid and fresh. A little background. My best buddy and I have been best friends for 17 years, and we were avid campers and outdoorsmen all through high school. We knew almost everything there is to know and did almost everything there was to do in the great outdoors. Camping was second nature to us. After high school in 2011, my friend's parents divorced, and he and his mother moved back to Europe where he was born. Last year, my buddy moved back here to Canada. It was amazing. The 8 years he was away seemed like a week. It was an immediate rebound, and we picked up exactly where we left off. Last summer, we really wanted to go on an epic camping trip just like the old times. However, our schedules and life in general got in the way. So we planned our epic trip and dedicated time to camp this past summer. August had finally come, and despite COVID, we were determined that absolutely nothing was going to ruin our trip. So we threw caution to the wind, and we decided to pack our gear and prepared for our lengthy drive from Ontario to British Columbia. Along our travels, we talked about many subjects, and it was at dinner I had mentioned your YouTube channel to my friend. He asked me if I believed in Sasquatch, and I told him I certainly do, and he looked at me in a strange way for a moment over his coffee cup. That I could believe in such a creature was crazy to him. But after talking with him further, he was more open-minded about such creatures roaming the forests. We arrived at our destination and hiked deep into the forest. We were a little ways in, and my friend stopped and started looking around. He told me that he felt uncomfortable, like we were being watched. I chuckled it off and said, "We've just been driving for hours. You're tired." He looked at me, shrugged, and said, "You're right, probably just my imagination." We got to a spot we liked and immediately started setting up our camp. Halfway through, my friend stopped and started scanning the area in front of the tent. He said he swore that he saw something large and upright moving down the path. I told him to start a fire and brew some coffee, and he did that without hesitation. After our coffee and beef jerky dinner, we could hardly keep our eyes open, so we left the fire burning and we went to bed. I don't know how long I had been asleep, but my friend was shaking the crap out of me to wake up. He told me he had awakened to go to the bathroom and was just about to unzip the tent when he was hit with the scent of vomit, skunk, and rotten meat, followed by seeing a large shadow of something bipedal cast over the side of the tent. I told him it was probably some other campers nearby that were messing around with us. My friend asked me to go outside to look before he peed. You go first. I unzipped the tent, popped my head out, and I started coughing. That scent he was talking about was still lingering in the air, but after scanning the area and seeing nothing, I said, "Everything's clear." The next day came and went without incident. By 4 p.m., my friend was starting to get a fire going, and I was preparing that night's dinner. Half an hour later, the food was over the fire cooking, and it smelled good, and we were relaxing, laughing, and enjoying some great German beer. Suddenly, both of us became overwhelmed with a feeling that we were being watched. The air started filling with a musty, rot scent that kept coming and going all throughout dinner. We searched for something, anything, but we couldn't find the source of that scent, and it finally went away as mysteriously as it had come. Bedtime finally came, so we hung the garbage bags high in the tree before turning in. I had trouble falling asleep that night, so I just laid there listening to the forest sounds. I was just starting to doze off, and I noticed that it got very quiet. Then I heard the sound of a twig snap not too far from the front of the tent. I got uncomfortable, and I felt like we were being watched, so I quietly sat up with a heightened sense of hearing. I heard the sound of sniffing slightly to the right of the tent where the garbage was hanging. My eyes started to water, and that putrid smell returned. My friend stirred and noticed me sitting up. Before he could say anything, I put my finger to my lips and I softly said, "Shh," and I pointed in the direction of the garbage. My friend sat up curious and confused. We listened for a moment. We heard what sounded like the garbage bag slowly being squeezed. I slowly moved to the door as quietly as possible, unzipping the screen flap and looking over in the direction that we heard the noises. Unfortunately, it was too dark to see anything, and I re-zipped the flap, and hearing nothing further, we went back to sleep. The next morning, while my friend was brewing coffee and I was getting dressed, my friend called my name and told me to come quick. I rushed out of the tent and I saw my friend pointing up. The garbage bags were gone, but the ropes were still attached to the tree and dangling over the branch 10 feet up. We searched the areas around the site a little bit better, but we had no success in finding our garbage bags. That night we turned in early because we had a very busy and eventful day ahead. We were talking when all of a sudden something small hit the tent. It was just a little plink sound. It sounded like a raindrop, so I closed the roof flaps thinking it was going to rain. Plink, plink, plink. Then that was it for about 10 minutes. And then, plank, something threw a decent-sized rock at the tent, and we looked at each other with eyes wide. We then decided to ignore it, thinking whomever was throwing the rocks would give up and go away. So we turned off the lamp, and we went to sleep. Sometime later that night, another rock was thrown at the tent, and then another. At this point, my friend finally had enough. He got up and went outside, and he yelled, "Whoever that is, throw another rock and I'm going to break your ass." That was that, and no more activity happened that night or the next. On our last night of camping, we were up late, sitting around the roaring campfire, just enjoying life. It really was nice. And then we heard a big splash. Something huge and heavy was either thrown or jumped into the water just down the path from our site. My friend and I looked at one another with wide eyes again. My friend was just about to say something when suddenly he heard a rapid splashing, like something quickly walking through the water. The splashing stopped suddenly, and we turned and intensely stared at the path, expecting to see someone or something approach us, but we never saw anything. A little while later, I had to go to the bathroom, and my friend said he did too. He got up and grabbed the flashlight from the tent, and he said, "After we go, let's go down and check the water." After emptying our bladders, off we went to the water's edge to do some investigation. We scanned the water in surrounding areas, but nothing immediately stood out. However, as we turned to go back up the path, in the mud by the water, my friend noticed a smudged impression and noted that this looks like a smudged footprint. As we were approaching camp, both of us were stuck with an uncomfortable feeling. When we got back to our area, the air was thick with that vomit, skunk, rotting smell. You guys have the best descriptions for some of these smells. I'm sorry. I just think it's so funny. Rotten, skunk, rotting, stinky feet. Oh, man, it's so good. My friend pointed to the tent, and he said, "The tent is open." And I said, "Well, you were the last one in there, but I know for certain you closed it." After going through our things to make sure nothing was stolen, we decided to get some sleep, as tomorrow we were going to disassemble everything and make our way back to Ontario. Again, we let the fire burn as we drifted off to sleep. Later that night, I was awakened by footsteps coming from behind the tent. It was pacing left and right. I must have drifted back to sleep because later I was awakened by my friend who was trying to keep from panicking. He was sitting up away from the side of the tent with his left hand covering his mouth and with his right hand pointing to the back of the tent, the same direction I had heard the footsteps earlier. By this time, the fire had died out and it was silent. It was eerily silent. I too sat up and I listened. Snap! A good-sized twig broke as something approached the tent. By this time, my friend was biting his finger, doing anything not to panic. And then we heard the sniffing coming from behind the tent. I slowly moved away from the back wall, and in what little light from the moon there was, we saw a shadow of something starting to lean over the tent, just as something pushed into it. My only guess is this was a foot because it was at the very bottom of the tent. It was quiet for a moment before hearing the groaning sound, and then suddenly both sides of the tent were being pushed in. The canvas of the tent was forming around massive hands. I mean massive hands. Suddenly, my friend just let loose a scream like a child who had just broke his favorite toy. It was ear-piercingly loud. Guys, this isn't funny, but it kind of is. It kind of is. Almost immediately, the creature stopped pushing in on the tent. After a moment, we heard what I can only describe as a freight train crashing through the forest. We didn't sleep anymore that night, and we waited until first light to pack up, and then we left. The walk from our site to the car was most uncomfortable. We had the feeling of watchful eyes coming from every direction. We quickly packed the car and drove to the nearest motel to get some restful shut-eye. When we woke up, we did some research and realized that that part of British Columbia is a hotbed for Sasquatch activity. I always knew that British Columbia had a lot of Sasquatch activity, and the whole time this was happening to us, it never crossed my mind that it could be Sasquatch. It's just something I never thought would happen to me. My friend and I aren't deterred because of the experience, and we plan on going camping again next summer. But since August, my friend has become very interested in Sasquatch, and he's a big fan of your channel. He signs off Andrew. And Andrew, dude, I'm sorry I laughed at your story, but I could just see your buddy sitting in the tent and then finally just screaming like a girl, and it just struck me as funny, and I apologize for it. But I want to tell you this is an exciting story, and here's what intrigues me about it. He's not even interested in Bigfoot. You kind of are. You stumbled on my channel and you listen to these stories. And you know the point of this channel is not to prove the existence of Bigfoot. It's just to share stories. But it piques your imagination and you do some research and you're pretty zeroed in that there's Sasquatch up there. And then he has an experience, and it's all kind of connected in a roundabout Kevin Bacon way to my channel. And I really appreciate that. And thanks for the nice words about the channel. And I'm glad you guys listen. And I'm also glad that you guys are going to continue to go back into the woods and go camping. Be some rawhide dudes and get out there. Those things didn't hurt you. They just kind of mess with us. And I hope you guys get out there and have some fun, because that's what life's all about. Getting out and doing it. Just do it. All right, Andrew, you did a fantastic job writing this. I did not have to edit one single word, and I really appreciate you, brother. Thank you very much. All right, we come to the end of Marathon 111, and I want to thank everybody who had anything to do with this. Mainly you guys, the listeners. Mainly you guys who write these stories to me to share with everyone else. I could not do this channel or my new project without you. And I want to extend my gratitude and tell you that I don't think there's any way I can thank you enough for giving me a source of having so much fun that I just can't hardly stand myself sometimes. So thank you very much, and we'll see you guys on the next video. Thank you.